On this edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling, I will be joined by Eddie DiOrio as we talk about the Great American Bash and Fyter Fest, a very unique stipulation for the upcoming WWE pay-per-view, and a disappointing SmackDown. That's all to come on this edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. And welcome back to another edition. I'm your host, Sean Meyers, and making his return to the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling today is one Eddie DiOrio. We had Eddie on about, 3 or 4 months ago at this point. Eddie, thank you for taking the time. What have you been up to over the last handful of months since we last talked?
Well, just keeping up with my wrestling and just trying to get through this whole summer and how it's been, and just hanging on till real live sports come back. But until then, I've been staying entertained thanks to these two companies that, well, as we'll probably get into, have been up and down in their own respects in different ways. But I will say they're two TV pay-per-views per se. They're live TV pay-per-views. They both were on them for the most part good. I enjoyed Fyter Fest and the Great American Bash, all 4 nights of the 2 shows each, very much so. So we'll talk about that, and I've been just keeping up with it because, like I told you before we just came on the air here, it's kind of the only thing on right now as far as a live sporting aspect that I pay attention to.
And that'll probably change about a month's time from now. There's plans for Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NHL all to return, and there's certainly skepticism about those, and I think that at times I've been skeptical, will wrestling continue? It has, maybe against better judgment, but it has continued, and it looks like it will continue. WWE, for the most part, seems to have gotten things contained with their outbreak of people testing positive. We knew a few weeks ago there was 30 or so individuals, maybe not all wrestlers, but people with the company. Haven't heard much in the way since then, and it seems like AEW, as Justin Lowry has alluded to, has done a better job all throughout. But it's always now a head-to-head competition between the companies, whether it's the Wednesday night ratings, which company is handling COVID-19 better, and keeping in line with that, last year AEW Fyter Fest was presented sort of like a free pay-per-view. It was on, I believe, a Saturday night, and anyone could watch it. You didn't have to pay for it, but it certainly was not like their weekly programming has been, because they didn't have a weekly show at the time last summer. That started in October, so they decided to make a 2-week special, Fyter Fest Now, on free television as opposed to a standalone event on a Saturday night. NXT came up with a similar concept, the Great American Bash, and I'm not sure which came first, but it's pretty clear at this point. One company sees what the other one's doing and tries to sort of match it, emulate it, whatever. You could go back to the live fans being in attendance, the fans, meaning other wrestlers. Does it reflect poorly on one company or the other, or do you sort of embrace the fact that they are going truly with like counter-programming, head-to-head, trying to match one another step by step throughout?
Well, it's always good for one party in this situation, and that's us, the viewing at home, because they do put out these shows, these, 2 pay-per-views on each channel. I'll flip over to this one because this one's on commercial. You can go from a street fight here to a heck of a tag team matchup on Fyter Fest, and, back and forth and whatnot. You can go from watching a guy like Orange Cassidy, who nobody is like that in WWE, to watching a winner-takes-all championship bout that we'll get to. But it's Triple H said to Sports Illustrated a few weeks back, maybe a month or so, he said that if you don't think there's a competition here, then you're not paying attention. So they acknowledge. I think both companies obviously acknowledge the fact. But I will say this, that when I said in my first statement that both companies have had their ups and downs during this whole pandemic time and empty arena era per se, the winner of the Wednesday Night War, as a matter of fact of acknowledging the other company, is WWE, because they're not acknowledging AEW not nearly as much as AEW is acknowledging WWE. I'm one that I think WWE can be extreme at times when it comes to their ability to not even remotely talk about wrestlers who they've released, wrestlers who are in other companies who used to be successful in WWE. They do
A guy
not
like
talk
Chris
about
Jericho, for instance.
Right, exactly. And which made me very surprised, actually, to see guys like him, Jim Ross, on The Undertaker's
Yes.
Last Ride documentary.
I thought the
very
same
surprised.
thing because I've been catching up on that. Although I will say, I'm almost sure that those interviews were done when they were with the company like 2 years ago. And they probably said, we got this good content. We really want to make this a special documentary. I think, however, what you're seeing is if they were to show a video package now of something, they would do their best to kind of squeeze out, Matt Hardy, which we saw with Jeff Hardy's stuff, or with Chris Jericho, or whoever may go over there, Luke Harper. Of course, he's probably not really going to be featured too much with the Bray Wyatt and Braun Strowman stuff. So, yeah, they definitely make an effort to minimize those people of the past.
Which I think is the right thing to do, especially when you talk about those wrestlers who are obviously on the other side of the fight. And then you go into Fyter Fest, and you had all the Taz stuff. Taz taking the jabs at WWE. You had the stuff, and we'll get to the I versus I stipulation or whatever, but you had Chris Jericho on Twitter saying, hey, we did that stipulation first. And then Chris Jericho also going on Twitter talking about the ratings and who really won the demographics and all that. And I tweeted it out after the I versus I tweet. I said, yep, keep drawing attention to the other guy. Like, that's not – who cares if you did it first? You just don't draw attention to the fact – like, the hardcore fans that you're kind of, trying to bring in, they know that you did it first. You don't have to remind them that – hey, WWE's doing an I versus I match, and I liked it when AEW did it, so maybe I'll watch it when WWE does it with a guy like, Rey Mysterio and Seth Rollins. Those are two of the best ones in that company. Maybe I'll watch that. And then they watch the pay-per-view, and they're like, the Swamp Fight was pretty good, or whatever, and they like it, and they say, I might start watching WWE again. That's the kind of stuff that you just can't acknowledge, and I think that's why WWE's been winning the war as far as acknowledging the other side. Just do what you do. Everybody knows that the Great American Bash lined up with Fyter Fest because, you didn't want to lose that. And
right.
NXT's actually, in a general demographic, as far as total viewers, they've been winning. And so is that a matter of how good the shows are? Not necessarily. I kind of thought that overall as a show, Fyter Fest, both nights were better than both nights of the Great American Bash. Not by much, but they were still both great shows. But if you were to ask me which one I thought was better, it was Fyter Fest. But the thing is that if you keep acknowledging the other side like AEW does, not only does it bring attention to it, but it also is really petty. Like how I thought
Tony Khan got involved with this on Twitter as well. And he's basically, he runs everything with AEW. He's the founder of it. And he brought up the ratings and said, we're thrilled with the ratings. We're winning the demographic that matters, kind of echoing what you've said that Chris Jericho has noted. And that's all true, and Dave Meltzer's all about that as well. It seems like AEW wins, they say it's a victory for AEW. NXT wins, they say AEW still won the demographic that matters. But when an outsider like Brian Alvarez or Dave Meltzer says that, so be it. When Chris Jericho and Tony Khan are saying how important the ratings are and how happy they are that they won the demo, here's what I would suggest. If things shift 3 months, 6 months down the road and they don't win that key demo for a couple of weeks in a row, then they have no leg to stand on, right? Because they're talking about how important the ratings are, how proud they are of winning that. And instead of focusing on just putting on a really good wrestling show and saying, we believe this product is continuing to get better and better and better, which I'm sure they say that, but the focus, the takeaway from someone who follows on Twitter is they're concerned so much about these ratings. They're really not drawing good ratings, either show, compared to what wrestling has always been. They're below 1 million. That's not great by any standard. And you look at WCW towards its downfall, and it was well over what those shows are doing. So if you're saying we care so much about the ratings and winning the demo, if that trend reverses and they don't win that, then they're going to look pretty bad, I think, down the road. And that's where they need to have maybe a better long-term outlook as opposed to being so focused on the ratings and more so about growing and making sure that each and every week their product is just of the highest quality. That would be my focus.
Absolutely. I agree 100% with you. And the thing about it is that I think AEW is just talking about AEW and NXT, not bringing in Raw and SmackDown into this yet, but just looking at those two shows as they go on those 2-hour time slots every Wednesday night. I think AEW has more wrestlers that kind of appeal to the demographic that matters to them. Guys like Jericho, who's just a funny heel. Everybody loves those. A guy like Orange Cassidy, who we've never seen before, but not only is he a good wrestler, but it's just so funny to watch his gimmick play out. Guys like Hangman Page, Moxley can be a good champion, all that. And, you got the JR and Britt Baker's been doing some really good stuff too. They have more wrestlers and figures in their company, I think, that appeals to our demographic. But NXT has those too. Guys like we saw Keith Lee, guys like Robert Stone, I think is funny. I don't get it, but I find it funny.
Well, he got run over by a tank, so I feel bad for the guy.
Which is funny. I thought that was really good. And but I think NXT from the start, I knew that I had this weird feeling that NXT didn't want to ever go on TV. I don't think they ever did. But when SmackDown moved to Fox and there was another USA wrestling slot open, and they said, hey, I don't think WWE and NXT are worried about winning the war. I really don't, because how many times have you seen like one of the NXT wrestlers come out and talk about the demographic? Have you seen anything? Because I haven't.
I have not. But that probably also trickles down where they know if they do say something about it, then they're probably going to hear about it. They might not have the same freedom. They've been said, don't mention the other company. That type of deal. Don't mention it in tweets. Certainly don't mention it on air. Stuff like that.
And we've seen the stuff, and we've seen some wrestlers go back and forth. We saw Sasha Banks tweet something about Jericho and Guevara when they were still together and everything. And,
right.
And so you've seen it go back and forth a little bit, but you've never heard the NXT talent themselves talk about the demographic and the ratings, because I don't think they're worried about winning the ratings. I think they're mainly worried about taking viewers away. I think that they're going to say the less eyes they get on that product, they can win by 100,000. Good. But that's 600,000 less people that weren't watching that show. They'll take that difference, I think. And that's business. And this NXT talent, it's thrown a whole new dynamic into the mix, because it was kind of odd, I thought, to see Matt Riddle move to SmackDown, because that seemed like a call-up. But there's a lot of people that now consider NXT the third brand, especially after they won Survivor Series.
And they have people who've gone down, like Finn Balor. Now, he's kind of the most notable one. And we know, like, Charlotte, she never really was in NXT. She was kind of just playing that for a while. But Finn went down. And you remember, like, Johnny Gargano was pretty much destined to go to the main roster, but he stuck around in NXT. Tommaso Ciampa, he got called up, got injured, went back and has stayed in NXT. It'll be interesting to see, do Adam Cole and his buddies come up, the Undisputed Era, because right now they're such a big draw in NXT. It feels like that'd be an absence. But here's where, once we get maybe a little bit closer to normal times, WWE is probably going to sign a handful more of people that they're interested in. You have to create room. So if you're going to bring these people to NXT, some people have to move on from NXT to the main roster just to create that space, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it seems like right now they could move up Undisputed Era, and there wouldn't be a massive lapse with the storylines, because they've sort of given, for the most part, kind of a conclusion that they can wrap up within the next week or two if they want, now that Cole's not the champion. Now that none of them are champions in NXT.
And they've done everything. They've been in NXT about as long as any NXT talent has before coming up to the main roster. And they've all done everything. They had the Prophecy stage where they were all the champions and they ran NXT.
Which I think was pretty cool, because you really don't, that truly is like dominating the entire brand.
And that was cool to watch. They were entertaining but now I think, here's my thing. I think now they're, with the whole Roderick Strong, Dexter Lumis angle and all the therapy sessions and everything like that, and Cole losing the title, but Undisputed Era didn't get involved or whatever. I think slowly but surely they're planting seeds for them to break up. I'm not kidding. I think that it'll be a more Strong versus Cole kind of deal in that situation, but I think that's what they're going towards. How they're going to weave it, where it's going to take place, on what brand, I don't know. But I don't see an issue with them moving to Raw or SmackDown. I would put them personally on Raw. I think Raw needs some more heels. I think
the concern is, will they succeed anywhere close to what they've been doing in NXT? And that really comes down to Vince McMahon, because he knows about these guys, but until he really sees them on his show, you don't know how he's going to, he could say, oh, well, yeah, I've heard that they've done great stuff. Let's give them a chance. And he might make up his mind within the first 3 weeks that Adam Cole's just doesn't look like a legitimate main event guy because he's so little. Or that Roderick Strong can't cut a promo to save his life, and he has no interest in using Roderick Strong in anything prominently. Because that's what's happened so many times that it's almost, some guys are better off staying in NXT, and I think Gargano and Ciampa are evidence of that as well. That you know what you get when you're in NXT. When you come up to the main roster, you could excel or you could become completely irrelevant.
The really hard thing, too, in that case, and you're right, I don't think Vince watches NXT and observes it like he probably should, thinking about this future talent that'll more than likely be on his roster within a year or 2 or 3, however long. And the thing is that sometimes he has listened to fans, and in the past, they'll push him and whatever. And we actually got a slight glimpse of what the UE would be like on the main roster with the whole Survivor Series build when Adam Cole defended the NXT Championship on Friday Night SmackDown against Daniel Bryan in front of a live crowd, an actual live crowd, and then the next Monday did it again against Seth Rollins. And, Bay, like, you saw it. Everybody loved seeing that. So you're right. I think Vince should have an idea about how good these guys are and how well liked and respected they are by the fan base. It's going to be really hard for them to make that transition in this era, though. I was thinking to myself when you gave me the topics yesterday, I said, how much sense would it make to bring Adam Cole up now, have him feud with McIntyre, and that could be a SummerSlam match, but that could go really weird because I don't want to see McIntyre lose the title yet because I think he's been the best thing on Raw. But Cole has nowhere to go in NXT. He really doesn't. There's no point in him.
Well, I think that this is, you said, when they moved to television, I think it really truly did become a third brand, and they had presented it as such. But we all know when it was limited to the WWE Network and it was an hour each week, that it wasn't anywhere close to equal footing to Raw and SmackDown. But now, it kind of is. And especially when these companies aren't going on tours, because Raw and SmackDown typically would get the major cities, and NXT for the most part wouldn't. Every now and then they would. But they would usually go to smaller cities and sometimes just stay in Florida. Well, without any of that, it really is, they're all pretty much equal. The only difference is NXT's drawing about half of what Raw or SmackDown are. But to your point, if NXT wasn't going against AEW, it would probably get over 1 million. So there's not a huge difference right now. I don't know necessarily that you could say that it's a developmental brand, but I think guys that have been there for a really long time, it's kind of like you want to see them just go against different people. You want to see Johnny Gargano go against Seth Rollins, for instance, someone like that. How about him against AJ Styles? If you can present him as a legitimate, like, this isn't just a guy who can work, but this is like going to be one of our at least upper mid-card to low-level main event guys, that's what you're looking for with Cole, Ciampa, Gargano, some of the other people, Io Shirai on the women's side when she comes up. You don't want her to be Kairi Sane. You want her to be more like Asuka, So we referenced that Cole's no longer champion. Keith Lee won it, and that's pretty big because Cole had held the title for a long, long time, and now you crown a new champion on television. This seemed like it was set up to really pop the ratings for NXT and make them the clear winner on Wednesday. Was that the match and the result that you think was able to accomplish that?
Well, I think I'll say this. I don't think Adam Cole would have how long and how great his reign was, because that was for how usually when you have a title
almost
reign that
a year,
long,
right? It was like 11 months or something, I think.
403 days, I think, was the final total. So it was over a year. And, I remember towards the end of Shayna Baszler's long NXT women's title run, I was just getting bored. I was just getting sick of it. Like, I was kind of like, all right, because like they would line up, Mia Yim lined up to face her. I was like, she ain't gonna beat her. This new Io Shirai, this was before Io Shirai kind of became a bigger name. I was like, I don't buy her as a credible threat to take it off of Shayna. It's all about credible threats to take the long title reigns off of the champion, and that's why it was awesome when Rhea Ripley won it off of Shayna on TV again at the end of 2019. We all bought it because they built Rhea up as this monster, angry babyface, though, that we all seem to love when presented correctly.
Right.
And she won, and it ended up being a pretty good program with Charlotte. Not going to lie, I was invested. And the same thing happened with Adam Cole. It just didn't have as much of a build. Keith Lee is 330 pounds and can move like a cat. In kayfabe, you can think of that and say, okay, Adam Cole losing to that's not a discrediting him at all.
Right.
It'd be different. I think it would have been different if he would have lost the title reign to either Finn or Johnny. And that's not because they're bad wrestlers, but because, not even a build with this. And these wrestlers are almost the exact same size, if not smaller. Adam Cole being a 400-day champion, he should win, and he beat Gargano and Finn Balor before.
Right.
If
he won the title from Gargano.
Right. So for him to lose it again, it wouldn't have made a whole lot of sense. Maybe more in Gargano because he beat him the first time in TakeOver New York. But back to Keith Lee, I'm really happy with this result. I think nobody deserves it more than him because I think he brought a lot of popularity and viewership to NXT because people look at him and he's almost like, I'll have to explain myself when I make this comparison, but he's almost like Otis in a matter of his size and just his physical appeal naturally draws.
And isn't that what Vince McMahon always wanted? Isn't that like the staple of Vince McMahon is wanting these larger than life guys that you would see walking on the street and say that guy has to be a professional wrestler or an athlete?
Well, I think here's the thing. We talk about Vince not watching NXT as much as he should and not knowing what to do with the talent once he gets it. I think he likes Keith Lee enough because think about it. You had guys like John Morrison, Cesaro, and Kofi Kingston, Rey Mysterio, Big E in the Royal Rumble just got chucked by Brock Lesnar in 10 seconds. MVP got chucked in 10 seconds.
Don't forget
each
Elias.
Time. Elias was also then there, yes, number 2. But who got the longest amount of time with Brock Lesnar? It was Keith Lee. Probably. I mean, if you go back and watch it, he had, if not the longest time, one of the longest times, and he looked good in the time he was in there with Brock Lesnar. Think about that's the kind of
same with Roman Reigns at the Survivor Series as well, which I really think that was like the defining moment for Keith Lee was Survivor Series because him and Roman killed it.
Yes, they did, and there was a real thought that when he hit the Spirit Bomb, that was going to be it, and Roman kicks out, hits the spear, and that's it. But it's still like you said, that established him on a Big 4 pay-per-view as a guy like, hey, maybe I should tune into Wednesday nights and see what this guy can do on a weekly basis. And they gave him the North American title, and he's done great things with that, and he can keep it. And now the NXT title. I'll be honest with you. Going back to that match, I thought it was going to be a no contest because I thought one Karrion Kross was going to interfere.
Yeah, I was honestly a little surprised too because we've seen so many times where they don't deliver a true winner, especially on free TV.
Right. And I loved how they showed him afterwards up in the rafters looking down on the celebration and everything, laughing with Scarlett and everything, because it leaves a seed of doubt in your mind because naturally you look at that and you're like, oh, okay, he's going after Keith Lee. But then why would Scarlett put the hourglass in front of Cole's feet a few weeks ago?
Well, I think it was for whoever the champion was,
Right. You could also say he went after Ciampa, so now he's going to go after Adam Cole. Like, those are two really big established names in NXT. And Keith Lee is obviously still ascending. He can get there, but he's not quite there yet at their status, just because he hasn't had as many moments or 5-star matches as Ciampa and Cole. And, we saw him stalking Gargano. He never attacked, but during that whole feud,
right.
Karrion Kross, I don't know if they're trying to make sort of like he's going after the biggest names and such. I was surprised, and I'm happy, because I think unless he does go after Keith Lee, which I wouldn't mind either, thrusting a guy like Karrion Kross into the title picture way too soon, I think, is almost a repeat offense with the whole Fiend.
Right.
This otherworldly kind of horror character.
Because you don't want Keith Lee dropping the title right away, but you don't want this guy that you're just establishing now to lose the match. So you book yourself into a no-win scenario if it's immediately Karrion Kross and Keith Lee a month from now. I agree with that.
But if it's Karrion Kross and Adam Cole, you could have Adam Cole lose again, and then
could you have Kross go for the North American title, or would that? I mean, honestly, anyone challenging Lee now would want to go for the world title, not the North American. So it's kind of confusing how they would work that out.
Yeah, I mean, it was. See, the thing about the last time they did this with Becky Lynch, obviously, it was easy because they were both world titles just on each brand.
Right.
So everybody would want at least one of them. Now you have, sort of like, now you're back to the Seth Rollins situation back after he beat Cena at SummerSlam when he had the WWE title and the US title. Obviously, he fought Sting that night, and then was it a rematch with Cena again, I think?
I could be wrong, but I thought that he actually, when the night that he had two matches, I thought he actually lost the was it the Intercontinental or US, whatever it was. He lost he lost that title that night to Cena, but then defeated Sting in the main event, I think, is how it worked out.
Right. So I could see a guy maybe like Cameron Grimes for NXT challenging for the North American title. That's kind of, they're building him up. Damian Priest, another name. But Lee's already beat them both.
So I think Dijakovic could very easily beat Lee for the North American title because they've already had that feud for a long, long time. Right,
and you could go back to that. And so, I mean, I don't know. It's going to be interesting because you could say, if you're Gargano or Balor, you could say, hey, we were right there with you in that triple threat. Give us the NXT title. So you don't have to push Kross right away, but it would make a whole lot more sense for me if he goes after Adam Cole, beats him, and then that really cements the status of Adam Cole as, well, where does he go now? Like, he lost the NXT title. This new guy just came in who destroyed Ciampa and now has beaten him. Maybe not a squash necessarily, but he comes in and beats you anyway. What does that mean for you? Where do you go now? And that maybe could be another brand.
I want to focus a little bit on Raw and SmackDown. We alluded to the really ridiculous stipulation that was set on Raw. Seth Rollins and Rey Mysterio, two great performers, two highly respected individuals in this business, but they're going very dark with this storyline. They had Seth kind of do a psychotic snap. I don't know, probably about a month or so ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, where he injured Rey Mysterio on the steps, an eye injury. It looked pretty decent. Kind of bizarre to begin with, but Mysterio's been selling that. So they had a match basically on Monday to set the stipulation for their Extreme Rules match. Mysterio won, and as you see here, Seth actually held Dominic captive for a little bit, but Aleister Black got involved, so on. There was various hijinks. Mysterio says we're going to have an eye for an eye match. And WWE, social media, confirmed that that's the actual stipulation. It wasn't just a phrase. They're really going to do an eye versus eye match. I think that this is interesting because the stipulation is so ridiculous that people are going to watch just to see what happens. But I think ultimately it's going to be stupid what happens. And really, you could sell it on just these guys being great in-ring guys and a regular story as opposed to going to this lengths. How do you see this playing out?
Well, the nice thing is that most competent people should realize that they're not actually going to pull an eye out of the socket. So you're right. They're going to, I'm going to tune in to watch how they do it. I'm really going to have to hold myself back from getting angry at the programming when, like you said, Aleister Black's going to get involved. Humberto Carrillo is going to get involved. Dominic's going to get involved. Austin Theory, Buddy Murphy, don't call him Buddy, Murphy, is going to get involved. And so overbooking is going to play a big factor in this match. I don't even know. I don't think it's going to be a traditional cinematic or like a different place, different location match that we're going to see with like Braun and Bray and Sheamus and Jeff Hardy and whatnot. And
but they're going to have to do some sort of editing at the end, right?
Absolutely. And so I'm wondering how they're going to do it. And I wonder is Seth Rollins going to be the Monday night one-eyed Messiah? Like what's the follow-up to it? Like, is it?
Yeah, I think that there's probably two things that they could do to sort of cover their tracks. They could either say like that they were able to like sort of reattach the eye, and that like it will heal in time, and then the person comes out with like a blind, what's the word I'm looking for here? An eye patch. Yeah. For like a month or 2 months, and then they're okay. So I think that's probably the most likely thing, is that the doctors were able to save the eye type of whatever, because the person will run to the back. The other thing is they could just do like a screwy finish where it actually doesn't happen, but they just end the match anyway. And it's like, oh, disaster averted. No one lost an eye, but lucky for whoever their opponent was about to rip it out, if not for Murphy coming out and stopping it or something like that. So obviously it's, once you immediately get it resolved where no one has their eye missing. The other one, I think, is they kind of play it up for like a month or so. But either way, it's to me, this doesn't appeal to me because I'd be watching anyway. But I do think that there will be people who will tune in, probably mockingly, just to see how ridiculous this might turn out. And that's very much what they did with the greatest wrestling match ever tagline. It was so absurd that it got people to watch almost hoping that they could ridicule it for being stupid.
Yeah, right. And it actually was a pretty good match. I mean, it wasn't, there's no such thing as the greatest wrestling match ever, but yeah, I agree. And I think the worst part of this stipulation is that it's because of the show's tagline. If it wasn't the horror show at Extreme Rules, I think this would just be another Extreme Rules match. And I'd probably prefer that more. But
yeah, I mean, like, imagine if they did a ladder match between those two. That would probably be an awesome match, right? Hey, Rollins, Mysterio, we're going to have a ladder match. It would be great. People would love that. They'd be so excited because they know how good those guys can be in a ladder match.
Right, exactly. So I don't think you needed the horror show tagline just because I think Braun and Bray were having the type of match they're having, which I would have been fine with anyway. I think that's a really intriguing story, and I think it's a really intriguing way they're presenting it. Why the title isn't on the line, I have absolutely no idea. That makes no sense to me.
Right.
I don't know why Bray is just saying, "Oh, hey, I want to fight again. We don't have to do it for the title this time, but let's fight again." Like, I know what it's leading to.
I think that means that Bray's going to win, right?
It almost has to, because then, plus, it wouldn't make sense for Bray to lose on his home turf.
Right.
Right?
It looks like it's going to set up for a match at SummerSlam where maybe Bray is the Fiend finally. And people are saying this is shades of Mick Foley in the 90s, where he was like the sweater-wearing Bray Wyatt with the family, with the Firefly Funhouse. And now he's the old Bray Wyatt with like the hat and everything, and then he's going to be the Fiend. So it'll be like the three stages culminating with the Fiend winning the title at SummerSlam.
I like that, and I think as much as I don't like the Fiend being the champion, I mean, I didn't think his title reign was bad by any means when he had it, but it goes back to you have to have him lose at some point, and you don't like to see a supernatural character lose. Like the Undertaker, as we saw in the documentary, he wouldn't lose much, but when he did, it was because of like a screwy finish, or because they were building up someone else, or it would only it wasn't like clean to a 53-year-old Goldberg. And we talked about that before on the last time I was on here,
right.
Actually. But I think that, like, my one friend, the one leading up to WrestleMania, picked Cena to beat him in the Firefly Funhouse. I said, "Are you kidding me? How could you have that match and not have Bray win?" And thankfully, that went good for Bray. I watched that back a few weeks ago. That's still an acid trip without drugs, but anyway, I think that they're so keen on this whole tagline of the horror show,
right,
that they're making the matches around that, and I don't get it, but it's different. So I'll never dock any company for doing something differently, because I'll always want to see how it plays out, whether it's good or it's bad, whatever. You tried something different, especially in an era like this, where you're trying to pull viewers off other channels. You're not just competing with other wrestling companies, you're competing with all of television, especially when live sports comes back. So
right.
it's gonna be interesting to see how this show goes. It could go one of two ways. I think it could be very good, or it's gonna be very bad. I don't think it's gonna be like a mediocre show. Money in the Bank was, I thought, great. 2.5 hours. The matches were short, sweet, to the point. The cinematic match was good, and that was a good pay-per-view. It was a nice, entertaining 2.5 hours. This Backlash, I thought, was pretty good for the most part. You don't want to have WrestleMania, Money in the Bank, Backlash be 3 good pay-per-views back-to-back in your house, too, with NXT.
Right.
All those pay-per-views were pretty good, I thought. You don't want to have a stinker leading up to SummerSlam. So I think that all these cinematic and stipulation matches, we always see how they can either add to a story and add to the intensity and appeal to a match, or they can really take away from it. And like you said, with some of the situations they've made with Eye for an Eye and this Bray-Braun swamp match, depending on how they book it, they could make it look really good, and they could make it make a lot of sense or not.
Something that maybe in the long run won't make a lot of sense was the return on Raw. And I thought Raw was pretty entertaining. I enjoyed it. Kairi Sane came back, and that was great, and she played the recorder, and seems like that's an absolute hit with the internet now. But something that really surprised me is what kicked off the show. It was Drew McIntyre. Dolph Ziggler comes out and says, "I have like a blast from your past. I'm not the only person you screwed over." And he brings out Heath Slater. And Slater was one of the guys who was legitimately released when they let go of, 15 or so people during the beginning of the pandemic. And here's the interesting thing. Slater cut legitimately probably the best promo of his entire WWE career, but then lost to McIntyre in 15 seconds. And now it looks like that was a one-off. He might not be back with WWE. I just saw right before we came on, he posted something, I think, about July 18th, which might be when his 90-day no-compete expires. Would you be surprised if he goes elsewhere, that WWE brought him back and gave him this high profile only to really boost his debut for another company?
Well, there's been a lot of rumors with him about like Impact Wrestling and Slammiversary and stuff like that.
That seems more likely than AEW. And I think Vince is fine with, if you don't go to AEW, he's probably not too upset about you going elsewhere.
Heck, they had Rob Van Dam on for Raw Reunion last year, which was one of the biggest surprises of that show. But he was an Impact. It wasn't because he was, going at AEW or anything like that. So I agree with you. I thought Slater's promo was the best thing, not only of that episode, but arguably one of the best promos of Raw that year. Like, if they still did the Slammies and they had best promo, could you imagine if him as a nomination with not being a full-time employee of the company?
Well, I could just flat out tell you they just wouldn't nominate him, because that's how this company works. They would just forget, he's elsewhere, then we're not including that. But But we've seen one-offs before, but rarely do they do it nowadays. Build up with a terrific promo, knowing that, hey, we're not going to bring him back. He very likely could go to another company. And in theory, he could go to AEW, right? I mean, they don't know for sure.
There's been people on Twitter, and I think Cody tweeted it, and it was like, no, it might have been like Instagram Live or whatever, but somebody was like, "You're bringing in Heath Slater, right?" And he just straight up said, "No, we're not." And so, I mean, that obviously, that's just Twitter. It could be a joke or whatever, but if I'm Heath Slater, you did exactly what you were supposed to do, not just for WWE, but for yourself. You cut one heck of a promo, and then had a really heartfelt and nice moment with McIntyre. So you still build McIntyre as a real good, nice guy babyface. You make yourself look good in the process, not only by cutting a nice promo, but still, like you said, the match wasn't long, but you don't need, especially WWE, they could use Heath Slater, I think, as much as anybody, because you don't need good wrestlers now, because you have enough of those. You need guys who can prolong a story, who can tell a story, who can really just kind of, I think Heath Slater's one of those guys that just gets it.
He's sort of like a little bit of an R-Truth, where he can get stupid stuff over, and it doesn't matter if he wrestles a 2-minute match or not. Because remember, he did this with like the tag team with Rhino, where and then I Got Kids. He's gotten stuff over that's not great. I'm not a Heath Slater fan, but I will say what he showed on Monday. Hey, if you want a reason to re-sign guys, and you re-signed Drake Maverick, Heath Slater would be on my list after what he showed you. And that's a guy that I think that they probably are loyal to, because he's been there for a decade. So if I'm Vince McMahon, I'm maybe rethinking this and saying, hey, why don't we bring him back?
Well, apparently, I think it was reported like weeks back that WWE offered contracts back to those that they released, but it was for significant less than what. Well,
and it comes down to, is this significant pay reduction still more than what he's going to get in Impact or elsewhere?
Correct. And so, which I think the answer would be no. So that's why I don't think you've seen many of those wrestlers come back. Now, I mean, if you're WWE, I don't blame you bringing him back to prolong the story with McIntyre, because the narrative made so much sense. Why Ziggler brought him out, why he turned on Ziggler.
If Jinder wasn't hurt, I think they would use him in this role next. And maybe they still will and just won't have him wrestle. Maybe they'll just have him come out and cut a promo.
Right, but Heath Slater didn't go anywhere. So, it's not like he went to Impact or he's in Impact now, but Impact somehow allowed him to go back to WWE for a one-off. Like, it's not like they brought him in from anywhere. He was just sitting on his couch, like, from where they left him, So there was no risk in that. If Heath Slater goes to Impact or wherever, New Japan, whatever, then WWE won't bring him back for anything.
They certainly did him a favor to this point.
I agree.
He goes somewhere else, and they say, "Hey, I just saw him on Raw. He cut a killer promo. I'm looking forward to, because maybe that's what his promos will be like on a regular basis now."
Right, and that's what I was thinking as far as, like, you obviously, with the whole Black Wednesday and everything that happened, and you kind of want some justice for those wrestlers to some degree. You want to see them either succeed in other companies or maybe get back to WWE. A guy like Drake Maverick, he got a massive push just by cutting a really heartfelt promo on Twitter right after he got his release, and that ultimately I think got him his contract back, or his job back. And you kind of want to give those wrestlers, I think, one more chance to maybe show something or some form of gratitude, and I think that might have been it for Heath Slater. I think WWE might have said to Heath, hey, if you want to, we'll invite you on to Raw. We'll put you in the opening segment with McIntyre. You can wrestle him, and really make the connection. I think he gets it, and he said, yeah, I'll do that. And then knowing for himself what he can do, maybe banking on himself and betting on himself to cut that good of a promo and really connect that story, then that, like you said, that shows to other companies, hey, this guy can move forward and develop good stories and make fans invested in something that didn't even involve Heath Slater before. It's a Dolph Ziggler Drew McIntyre match, and yet Heath Slater made me more invested in that match than I wasn't before.
Right. Final thing, I thought Raw was good for some of the reasons we mentioned. I thought SmackDown was not good, and I think most people had that same take. And the one segment that sort of epitomized that was the women's karaoke. I saw so many people, even before it aired, saying, like, this is 5 steps back for the women's evolution. I didn't look at it like that, because they could make it entertaining. And I think some of these women, and I have a person who would know who told me Lacey's a heck of a singer. So, like, okay, if you can add something and show a talent, why not? But they did it like how they always do. Like, Dana Brooke and Tamina were made to look ridiculous, and it led to, like, this cat fight. And the most disappointing thing was, it actually turned out that they used this sort of as a heel turn for Lacey Evans, but it was such a stupid way to do a heel turn that people were like, does that even count? Like, is she really a heel? I don't get it. Like, it just looks like it sets up her against Naomi, and they might do a tag match with Tamina and Dana Brooke. But I don't have a problem with them doing, like, outside the box stuff if you present it, like, in a way that shows off people's talents and not just a stupid throwaway segment that's embarrassing for everyone involved, which is what I thought it turned out to be.
I was looking up, just watching videos on this by some other YouTube channels that cover wrestling, and one of the guys alluded to the point that, like you said, and like you just mentioned, this is something you would see prior Bella Twins AJ Lee era, Divas era. Like, this is something they do with women early 2000s, mid 2000s even maybe. But, and you're right, they maybe could have done this better. And if you wanted to start a feud between Naomi and Lacey Evans, yes, you could have done this. But why Dana Brooke and Tamina had to be there, that I don't know. But I think
Tamina seems like the last person that should be in a karaoke contest.
Karaoke showdown, right? Yeah, I would think maybe Carmella would be good for that. I don't know what everyone's situation.
That's perfect, absolutely.
But I'm just, you're right. Kind of like a misplacement. And Dana Brooke, like,
her shtick is just being like stupid at this point, right? Like, she's like the butt of jokes.
Right before Money in the Bank, they were building her up to be like this. Hey, she's strong. She can wrestle. She can maybe be a threat to some people.
Yeah, they also built up Tamina to challenge for a title, which now looks completely ridiculous because she's done nothing since.
They just go back on what they build. It's the one step forward, two steps back with them, especially with their women's division for the most part. If your name isn't Charlotte, Bayley, Sasha, Asuka, or Becky, you aren't getting a continuous legitimate push. And it's just annoying because then you look at overexposure, because I kind of wanted to get into that. Everyone and their mother was complaining. I mean, I saw it on the Twitter, 5-Star Podcast Wrestling Twitter, about how much Charlotte was getting overexposed. And she was on 3 shows every week for almost 2 or 3 weeks straight. And yet, when was the last time Sasha and Bayley weren't on the 3 shows, just like Charlotte was?
I'll give you my take on this, and we have to wrap it up pretty soon. But here's the difference. This is before you were a regular wrestling fan, but if you went back and watched WrestleMania 30, you know about Daniel Bryan's journey. He was wrestling on every Raw, like 2, sometimes 3 matches, because he was that good and people were that into watching him wrestle that it worked. No one was clamoring, at least not many people were clamoring to see that much Charlotte, because we've seen so much of her with the title for 5 straight years. But to me, this feels fresh with Sasha and Bayley, because Bayley's really found her footing as a heel. Sasha was gone for a while. She was sort of in no man's land for a while. Now she's, I would say back to her true NXT Sasha Banks, where she's just killing as a heel, going out having great matches. But they've been so entertaining in everything that they do that I think people say they are going to add to the entertainment value each and every week, and they weren't saying that about Charlotte. And I think for a while they weren't saying that about, for instance, Seth Rollins, who was thrown with a couple storylines on Raw, his own, and Becky Lynch. It just has to be entertaining where they add to the show, as opposed to like, oh, not this again, which is Baron Corbin when he was running Raw. No one wanted to see Baron Corbin multiple segments every week. But I think people have enjoyed seeing Sasha and Bayley. And as long as they can keep that up, it seems like it's adding to every show that they're on.
And this will be the last point I make here. Thanks again for having me on.
Absolutely.
But how I see it is, I have no problem with them being exposed on multiple brands if it prolongs their storyline, right? We all knew ever since WrestleMania that it was going to happen. Sasha or Bayley, or one of them's going to turn on each other, and it's going to set up that match that everyone's wanted to see since the Iron Man match in NXT.
That's not happening, I don't think, at SummerSlam. I think they've pushed that down the road a little bit.
Which is weird. Which to me means that you were seeing it. You were seeing Sasha would volunteer Bayley for a match, and Bayley would volunteer Sasha, but then Sasha would look good with the title around her waist. She was wearing it. And so I think now they're winning matches, and so it kind of went back on that narrative. So I don't know. I hope it just wraps up, and I hope they can really make the payoff worth the investment that we've had for months now since WrestleMania with those two.
We'll see if that wraps up. We're going to wrap up out of time here. Eddie DiOrio, great job as always. We appreciate it. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling on Instagram, 5-Star Pod Wrestle on Twitter. Subscribe to the YouTube channel And in the meantime, we'll catch you again next week. It'll be right here on the 5 Star Podcast of Wrestling.